There is a moment in every major war when the unthinkable becomes real, when a threshold is crossed that transforms the conflict from a regional crisis into a civilizational rupture. For the Middle East, that moment arrived on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a combined air campaign against Iran, and Tehran, within hours, answered with something no country in the region had ever done before at this sustained scale. It rained ballistic missiles directly into the heart of Tel Aviv. Not a single strike, not a symbolic volley, a relentless, grinding, daily campaign of ballistic missile fire aimed at Israel's most densely populated metropolitan center. What has unfolded since that first terrible exchange has permanently altered the strategic geography of the Middle East and produced consequences that will reverberate across global security architecture for decades to come. To understand the full weight of what happened, you have to understand what preceded it. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched airstrikes on Iran, targeting military and government sites, assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and other Iranian officials, and inflicting civilian casualties. The surprise attacks were launched during negotiations between Iran and the U.S. Iran responded with missile and drone strikes against Israel, U.S. bases, and U.S. allies in the Middle East, and by closing the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global trade. The scale of Iran's immediate military response was staggering in its breadth. Iran struck Israeli targets in Tel Aviv and Haifa, while also striking targets in Bahrain's capital Manama, Kuwait International Airport, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, Eastern Province in Saudi Arabia, Erbil International Airport, the U.S. Consulate General in Erbil, and reported striking U.S. bases including Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain. In a single operational surge, Iran transformed itself from a regional power absorbing punishment into an active combatant, striking the infrastructure of the world's most critical energy region simultaneously. The strategic ambition was breathtaking. The execution, though not perfectly accurate, was operationally coherent. The missiles that began falling on Tel Aviv on February 28th were not symbolic gestures. On February 28th, a direct hit in Tel Aviv killed a civilian woman and injured 22 others, one seriously. Air raid sirens, a sound Israelis have heard before, but never with this frequency, never with this persistence, became the soundtrack of daily life across the country's most populous metropolitan region. Israeli airspace was shut down. Ben Gurion Airport, the country's aviation lifeline, was effectively paralyzed. Millions of people spent days cycling between their apartments and bomb shelters, calculating the 90-second window that home front command guidelines grant between a siren's wail and a missile's impact, and the missiles kept coming. What followed was a relentless, sustained campaign of ballistic fire, unlike anything Israel had faced in its history. Israeli broadcaster Can 11 reported that 90, 65, 25, and then 20 missiles were launched at Israel from Iran on each of the first 4 days of the war. Although the number of missiles in each volley decreased over time, the missiles themselves increased in size and impact. Iran was not simply depleting its arsenal in a frantic opening salvo. It was adapting, shifting from volume to precision-seeking weight of warhead. The most devastating single strike of the campaign came on March 1st. A missile attack in the residential Ramat Lehi neighborhood of Beit Shemesh just before 2 p.m. local time destroyed the Tiferet Israel synagogue and caused extensive damage to the bomb shelter beneath it. 9 civilians were killed, including siblings Sarah Beighton, age 13, Abigail Beighton, age 15, and Yaakov Beighton, age 17, Gabriel Riva, age 16, Oren Katz, age 46, Sarah Elimelech, age 67, and her daughter Ronit Elimelech, age 45, and Bruria Cohen, age 76, and her son Yossi Cohen, age 41. A father lost 3 children in a single afternoon. A first responder who arrived minutes after the strike described finding body parts strewn across an area where he knew every family personally, saying repeatedly, "This isn't real. It looked like I was watching a movie." Beyond the human horror, what the Beit Shemesh strike exposed was a deeply troubling pattern in Iran's tactical approach. The executive director of the Arms Control Association assessed Iran's targeting of cluster munition warheads at residential sections of Israel as deliberate, saying Iran appeared to be launching them into relatively populated areas, probably with the goal of producing potential civilian harm. Human Rights Watch confirmed 3 separate Iranian attacks involving cluster munitions in Israeli population centers, documenting at least 4 additional civilian deaths in Yehud on March 9th and Ramat Gan on March 18th. Cluster munition bomblets are dispersed over a wide area, making them unlawfully indiscriminate in violation of the laws of war, Human Rights Watch stated. By March 10th, Israel's Home Front Command said that 50% of Iranian missiles contained cluster munitions, meaning that although the number of missiles per salvo had decreased, the number of individual munitions falling on Israel appeared to have increased. By April 6th, cluster munitions from a single Iranian attack struck roughly 50 locations across central Israel in a single day. The tactical calculus was precise and brutally effective. Use inaccurate ballistic platforms but compensate through area effect munitions that guarantee wide footprint impacts across urban terrain. Israel's missile defense architecture, the most sophisticated layered air defense system ever constructed, incorporating Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow system, absorbed extraordinary punishment but revealed real cracks. The largest death toll in a single strike demonstrated the limits of Israel's missile defense network and showed that even reinforced shelters could be vulnerable in extreme circumstances. On March 24th, the Israeli Air Force was investigating the failure to shoot down an Iranian missile that struck Tel Aviv, noting that several attempts to intercept the projectile were made, but air defenses failed to knock it down, even though the missile model used had been successfully intercepted before. This was perhaps the most alarming intelligence revelation of the campaign for both Tel Aviv and Washington. After decades and billions of dollars invested in Israeli missile defense, a persistent adversary with sufficient ballistic inventory could still punch through. By late March, the UAE and Kuwait had spent roughly 75% of their Patriot missile interceptor stocks, while Bahrain was estimated to have depleted as much as 87%, according to the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. The interceptor economics of this war were unsustainable at scale. Iran's military campaign simultaneously struck at targets far beyond Israeli soil, demonstrating that the IRGC had long prepared for a multi-theater war of attrition. On March 1st or 2, Iran struck the radar bases for U.S. THAAD missile defense systems in Jordan, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, destroying at least one of them. The destruction of even one THAAD radar in the region was an event of enormous strategic significance. These are among the most advanced and expensive ground-based defense assets the United States operates, designed to intercept ballistic missiles in their terminal phase. Their degradation created coverage gaps that any sophisticated adversary would immediately exploit. Meanwhile, American intelligence assessed that Iranian personnel were digging out underground missile bunkers and silos from the rubble, bringing them back into service hours after being struck by the U.S. and Israel, casting doubt on how close Washington had come to its goal of destroying Iran's missile capability. American intelligence also found that Tehran had preserved a notable amount of missiles and mobile launchers and had deployed decoys to frustrate U.S. targeting. The strikes on Tel Aviv and the broader regional missile campaign carry implications that stretch far beyond the immediate battlefield. For Israel, the psychological and strategic rupture is profound. The country was built on the doctrine of deterrence, the idea that the overwhelming credibility of Israeli military power would prevent adversaries from ever directly and persistently striking Israeli cities. That doctrine did not fail entirely, but it was severely tested. Iran struck Tel Aviv, struck Haifa, struck Beit Shemesh, struck the Tel Aviv district repeatedly, and struck the vicinity of the IDF's own Kiryat headquarters, its central military command compound in the heart of the city, with cluster munitions on April 4th. An Iranian missile strike hit in the vicinity of the IDF's Kiryat headquarters in Tel Aviv, with rescue forces operating at the cluster munition impact site following a ballistic missile attack. The symbolism could not have been more deliberate. Iran was telling Israel and the world that no target was beyond reach. For NATO and European security, the strategic implications cascade outward in multiple directions. Europe is not a passive observer of this conflict. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz sent global energy prices surging toward $100 per barrel of Brent crude, directly inflating energy costs for European households and industries already strained by years of post-Ukraine economic pressure. European air defense systems, from the Patriot batteries deployed across Eastern Europe to the naval assets of France, the United Kingdom, and Italy operating in the Mediterranean, were watched anxiously by alliance planners who observed how quickly interceptor stockpiles were burned through at rates that shattered peacetime planning assumptions. The lesson registered immediately. The interceptor economics of a sustained missile war are fundamentally different from anything NATO's defense industrial base was configured to sustain. The campaign also demonstrated with sobering clarity that the traditional architecture of Middle Eastern security, premised on U.S. forward deterrence, Israeli qualitative military superiority, and Gulf state reliance on American protection, had been severely stress-tested and found to carry real vulnerabilities. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was struck. A THAAD radar was destroyed. An American F-15E was shot down over Iran in what became a dramatic multi-day rescue operation. The U.S. and Israel launched more than 3,000 strikes on Iran since the conflict erupted on February 28th, while Iran retaliated with a total of 1,511 strikes against targets in Israel and neighboring Gulf countries, according to ACLED. At that exchange ratio, even the world's most powerful military coalition was absorbing real operational costs. The strategic conclusion that history will ultimately draw from Iran's sustained missile campaign against Tel Aviv is both alarming and clarifying. The war of 2026 demonstrated that Iran had invested its decades of sanctions-era isolation not in capitulation, but in the patient construction of a ballistic missile arsenal capable of reaching Israeli cities persistently, at volume, and with area effect munitions that multiplied the lethality of individually imprecise weapons. It demonstrated that layered missile defense, however sophisticated, has finite interceptor depth and exploitable seams. It demonstrated that a regional power with asymmetric tools, closing a global shipping choke point, striking Gulf infrastructure, sustaining daily missile fire, could impose extraordinary economic and psychological costs on a technologically superior coalition. And it demonstrated, above all, that the Middle East's security architecture, the assumptions of deterrence, the hierarchies of power, the geography of threat, had been fundamentally, irreversibly redrawn. The families sheltering in the Beit Shemesh synagogue on March 4, 2026 did not survive to see what the world was becoming. But what happened to them, and to the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa and every Israeli community that learned to count 90 seconds, will shape how states arm themselves, how alliances design their defenses, and how the question of deterrence is answered for a generation.